Welcome back to the Aztec campaign. We're back to talk about the reign of Moctezuma and the Spanish invasion under Cortés. Today we're playing the third mission, in which we have to fight the Spanish for the very first time. I'm quite looking forward to it because after learning the true story about Cortés and his narcissistic complexes, I'm actually eager to get back at him. This mission is called Quetzalcoatl, and I'll be telling you a little more about this deity today. But first we'll get another introduction from Cuauhtémoc. Right at the beginning, he will mention that the lake around Tenochtitlan began to boil and caused a flood, which is ironically also the name of the fifth mission, but this is a reference to the fifth of 8 omens that were seen by the Aztecs as a sign of an incoming catastrophe.
Passed down to you by Cuauhtémoc, jaguar warrior of Tenochtitlan. Another omen. The lake around the great city of Tenochtitlan rose and boiled. It foamed until it washed against the houses of the city, sweeping many of them into the lake. I accompanied our dignitaries to meet with the new arrivals. We journeyed towards the coast, through the lands of our enemies, the Tlaxcala. When we emerged from the forest, the strangers welcomed us, although they kept their weapons nearby. I told them that we were Aztecs, representatives of the great Montezuma. Their leader said that his people were Spanish, and he named himself Cortés, although he seemed pleased when we referred to him as Quetzalcoatl. Although their armor and animals seem otherworldly, they did not seem like gods to me. We presented Cortés gifts of finest cotton and plumes of bird feathers, but he seemed more interested in the gold ornaments. He asked again and again if there was more gold to be found in Tenochtitlan. By now, Cortés had advanced all the way to the lands of the Tlaxcala. There was initial warfare made between Tlaxcala and the Spanish. However, when Cortés heard stories about the size of Tenochtitlan and the number of our brave Aztec warriors, he suggested that the Spanish and the Tlaxcala join forces and attack the Aztecs.
At the end of the second campaign mission, I told you the story of Cortés' century-long deception, how he cunningly used Moctezuma's bribes to feed the Spanish king the legend that he was supposedly the returning god of Quetzalcoatl, which was not true at all. Moctezuma tried to get rid of Cortés early on by bribing him, but Cortés couldn't return home because he faced the gallows for sailing to America without permission and conquering the country. I have also told you that the campaign unfortunately takes Cortés' story as if it were reality, and therefore retells not the true events, but the lies of Hernán Cortés, thus making the Aztecs appear much more simple-minded than they actually were. Neither Moctezuma nor anyone else considered Hernán Cortés to be Quetzalcoatl. Let's go into this anyway and see what we can find out about this god. Quetzalcoatl was often depicted as a feathered serpent, because that is probably what the name literally means. There's also a figurative meaning. Quetzalcoatl refers to the wisest of people. While Quetzalcoatl was always depicted as a feathered serpent in the oldest traditions, ancient Mayan finds already show depictions of Quetzalcoatl with more human-like features. While we're on the subject, Quetzalcoatl was a god who was worshipped and feared in various ways by many people in Central America, not just the Aztecs. However, it can be said that Quetzalcoatl was the most important deity for the Aztecs because in the Aztec belief, he played a similar role to Prometheus in Greek mythology, as he was also credited with creating humanity. Aztec gods were also assigned to the Aztec calendar for rituals, and as luck would have it, Quetzalcoatl was assigned to the year 1519, the very year in which Hernán Cortés encountered the Aztecs. Here in the intro, this first encounter was described as Moctezuma giving him gifts and inviting him to Tenochtitlan. But that, my friends, is just wrong. That's not true at all. Montezuma sent Cortés these gifts to get him to leave again. As I said, he wanted to bribe him to go away. Cortés, of course, took these gifts, but he insisted on being allowed to come to Tenochtitlan, which Montezuma strictly forbid. The message was clear as day. It was nice having you here. Here's some gold. Now get lost. Accordingly, Montezuma's diplomats left immediately after delivering this message, without Cortés, of course. After the withdrawal of Moctezuma's envoys, the king of the Totonacs, an Aztec vassal, contacted the Spaniards and formed an alliance with them because they had a common enemy. We already learned in the first two missions that Aztec vassals suffered a terrible fate because they were forced to fight in the Garland Wars. Therefore, they saw this as an opportunity to get rid of their hated rulers. Although the Cuban governor's order, namely the exploration of the area, had technically been fulfilled with the landing, Cortés denies his soldiers to return to Cuba and instead founded the settlement of Villarrica de la Veracruz, just a few kilometers from what is now the city of Veracruz. There, he quickly had himself appointed Captain General, making him directly subordinate to the Spanish crown instead of the Cuban governor, and thereby freeing him from any obligations to the hostile governor in Cuba. At last, he could devote himself to his campaign of conquest. To win the crown over to this cause, he sent a ship loaded with all the gold the newcomers could gather back to Spain. He had all other ships destroyed to eliminate any possibility of retreat, which we've seen at the end of the second mission. He then marched inland with about 300 soldiers and a significantly larger number of Totonacs. And by the way, no one actually believed Cortés to be Quetzalcoatl. Not his Totonac allies, not the Maya whom he had met earlier, and certainly not Moctezuma. The intro also mentions the Tlaxcaltecs. This is the people we had already fought in the previous mission. They were essentially the arch-enemies of Tenochtitlan and, therefore, of us playing as the Aztecs from Tenochtitlan. It's true that the Tlaxcaltecs initially resisted Cortés's campaign, and quite effectively so, even though the Spaniards had far superior weapons. I imagine it felt a bit like being stuck in the feudal age while having to fight conquistadors. They must have had insane micro, though. In any case, Cortés became increasingly desperate and made several peace offers to the Tlaxcaltecs while fighting them, which they declined one after another until they finally decided that it was probably for the better to be allied with the Spanish once they realized they shared a common enemy in the Aztecs. Since the alliance between the Spaniards and the Tlaxcaltecs was formed on September 23rd in 1519, the events of this mission must have taken place shortly before that. We begin the mission with a settlement in the south of the map, surrounded by lush jungle, a few starting resources, and, most importantly, already in the castle age. Our settlement is deep in the jungle, so it looks like we're safe for now.
We do not know the intentions of these Spanish arrivals. For now, our enemies are the Tlaxcala.
To the east are the Spaniards, and to the west the Tlaxcaltecs. At first, we don't see anything from the Spaniards, but we do know that the Tlaxcaltecs likely have a city in the west that can defend itself. Our own settlement is equipped with a few buildings and farms, but we barely have any villages, so we need to start booming. However, right after I queued up my first villages, we received news from our allies.
The Spanish are attacking our allies in Tabasco. We must come to their aid.
Yes, I failed to mention that we have allies. We are not alone in these missions. Our allies, the Tabasco, are settled just north of us along a river, and unfortunately well within the range of Spanish attacks. The Tabasco have a small settlement and are being attacked by Spanish cannon galleons. On top of that, they're dangerously close to the Tlaxcaltecs and therefore need protection from them as well. They're kind of sandwiched in between these two enemies. And let me tell you, this was not easy on the hardest difficulty to play. Since you lacked the resources to create an army in the beginning and the Spaniards attacked the Allies right away, I had to start experimenting to save Tabasco. You can complete the mission without the Tabasco surviving, but I was determined. And besides, there's an achievement for finishing the mission while keeping them alive. I tried and tried again, and I finally managed it on my 4th attempt, and here is how I did it. I immediately sent a villager to the Allies because they're actually quite far away from us and there's quite the walking distance, and I protected this villager by my eagle warrior from the jaguars roaming around in the jungle. That villager then quickly built 2 monasteries, one for a monk and the other to research sanctity, to give them a better survival chance against conquistadors, and well then I had 2 monasteries to build monks from. I then converted the conquistadors, knights and longswordsmen, and I used them to attack the cannon galleons. Later I also researched atonement because the Spaniards kept converting my conquistadors back and I needed something against those monks. It was a much slower economic start for me, but it seems like this was the only way for me to stop the Spaniards' initial push. Speaking of economy, this of course really set my eco back because I had to go on gold and invest everything into building monks. But as soon as I could, I started building a second town center and I actually started my boom. But since the population cap is 100 in this mission, I only went up to 70 villagers and then deleted some to make space for more military. I built castles near the ally and launched attacks from... But first, I had to advance to the Imperial Age so I could produce trebuchets and finally destroy the settlements of the Tlaxcaltecs and the Spanish. Speaking of enemies, the Spaniards have allied themselves with the Tlaxcaltecs and now want to fight us together.
Our runners have confirmed that the Spanish and Tlaxcala have formed an alliance against us. Now we must do battle with them both.
So this is why we know that this fight or this mission should take place around the September of 1519, because that's when this alliance was formed. But this alliance doesn't make things easier for us. Not only do we have to protect our ally again and even more, they're being attacked from both sides now, so the boom I described earlier was anything but simple. But fortunately, the Aztecs have excellent monks, and whatever military I couldn't afford, I simply converted from the Spaniards. They seem to have endless troops though, so it was quite the task. I also got a little lucky with the placement of one of my castles to the west of Tabasco, because that's where the enemy, the Tlaxcaltecs, sent their troops, and they kind of always sent them right under my castle, which kept both me and my allies pretty safe for now. Of course, they didn't like my castle, so they did haul the one or other trebuchet at me, but that I just sniped with my eagle warriors. So for now, the Tlaxcaltecs were kept in check. Luckily, there is also a way to weaken my other enemies, the Spanish.
The Spanish armies are dangerous because of the beasts they ride into battle. If we could capture these animals, then the Spanish would be much less of a threat. This is the pen where we will corral the captured Spanish horses.
Sounded great, but my ungrateful ally really put me in a bind here. The horses are kept by the Spaniards in small pens. There are a total of 26 horses on the map, and I had to bring back 20 of them into my settlement. Unfortunately, the Tabasco never got word of my side quest and slaughtered 7 of the Spanish horses at the first opportunity. 26 minus 7, that doesn't make 20, that's 19 horses, so they kind of failed me there. To complete the mission also, and this is getting worse and worse, I must defeat the Spaniards as well as the Tlaxcaltecs, either by destroying them outright or by stealing 20 horses, which I can't do because they killed my horses. And anyone who knows the old campaigns know that the AI only surrenders when it has no units or buildings left. In my search for the horse pens, I reached the coast in the north and discovered several shipwrecks. And that's when I started looking for Cortés.
It is here that the Spanish sank their own transports to prove their determination to conquer our lands. Cortés must be nearby.
I looked everywhere. I looked close by, and then started to look in every nook and cranny. I explored everything there was to explore on this map, trying to find Cortés and trying to do some alternative history, maybe by murdering him before he could conquer Tenochtitlan. But there was no sign of Cortés. He was simply not on the map, which is a shame because they kind of teased me into looking for him. But it does make sense because the developers didn't want to have some alternative history written in this mission. At least the campaign against the Tlaxcaltecs was child's play. Facing the Spanish, however, was quite another story. They had castles with fortified walls, cannon galleons, and bombard towers that dealt serious damage. Thanks to my fully upgraded Eagle Warriors, though, and a bit of patience, I managed to sneak through the jungle and defeat the Spanish to the last man and ship, thus completing the mission successfully.
Although the Aztec warriors fought well that day, my men were frightened by the beasts that the Spanish rode into combat and by the noise of their exploding weapons. Although we had survived the attack, I thought it best to withdraw towards Tenochtitlan and share with Emperor Montezuma all that we had learned. I don't know if my uncle Montezuma was being cowardly or merely trying to preserve us from the wrath of the gods, but he sent more gifts to Cortés along with an invitation to visit our great city as his personal guest. I was there when Montezuma met Cortés on one of the causeways leading into our great city. The Spanish had evidently never seen anything like Tenochtitlan, and they stared in wonder at the brightly colored markets and pyramids rising out of a man-made island in the middle of a gigantic lake, Texcoco. Some of the Spanish soldiers asked whether it was all a dream, the first glimpse of things never heard, seen, or dreamed before. Montezuma led Cortés to the top of the Great Pyramid, where he pointed out the various canals and neighborhoods of the city. But Cortés was mostly interested in gold ornaments and helped himself to any which he encountered. I was no longer convinced that this man was Quetzalcoatl. So says Cuauhtémoc, jaguar warrior of Tenochtitlan.
Cuauhtémoc's doubts about Cortés were well-founded, but he should have doubted a few other things too. For starters, I couldn't find any sources for the battle we fought in this mission. Historians agree that, after forming their alliance, both Cortés and the Tlaxcaltecs knew they stood no chance alone against Tenochtitlan. Instead, after fighting the Tlaxcala, for nearly 2 weeks the Spanish recuperated in Tlaxcala and then together marched on with their military to Cholula in October 1519. There, they killed the local king, who had just broken his alliance with the Tlaxcaltec, for having become a vassal of the Aztecs, and thus a target of the Tlaxcaltecs. Had the king known that the Tlaxcaltec would ally with the Spaniards, he might have resisted vassalage. But let's be honest, his situation was grim either way. Become an Aztec vassal and supply them with human sacrifices, or become a Spanish ally and be forced to march against the Aztecs to a likely death. The king of Cholula was replaced by a loyal puppet, making Cholula a further ally of Cortés. Now, Cortés finally had an army large enough to take on Tenochtitlan. But of course, it was different than what's being told in this mission because he never received an invitation to go to Tenochtitlan. Instead, he had to undertake a 2-week-long march, reaching the Aztec capital on November 8th in 1519. What exactly happened that day is quite hard to reconstruct. It's mostly guesswork, but there are a few sources that help us guessing. Most sources claim Moctezuma II and Cortés actually met and supposedly exchanged gifts. Moctezuma then is said to have given Cortés an Aztec calendar and gold and silver discs, which Cortés allegedly melted down to send back to the King of Spain. With what ship, I have no idea. What we do know is that Cortés and his men gained access to Tenochtitlan in a peaceful way. Cortés claimed that Moctezuma immediately handed over his realm to the King of Spain, something historians find utterly implausible. Some historians speculate why Cortés made these claims in the first place, and there is evidence of an Aztec source that quotes Moctezuma as saying to Cortés in Nautla, which I can't speak, so this is a translation I found on the internet in English. It goes as follows: "You have come to sit on your seat of authority, which I have kept for a while for you, where I have been in charge for you, for your agents, the rulers." But we know Aztec culture prized extreme politeness and often said the opposite of what was actually meant. So historians believe that, even if this account is authentic, Moctezuma was merely expressing, in a very polite way, his own long-standing legitimacy as a ruler. Of course, it didn't help that this phrasing only fueled the myth that Moctezuma believed Cortés to be the returning Quetzalcoatl, and that fit neatly into Cortés's fabrications. In any case, after 8 months of fighting the Aztecs and other tribes, Cortés finally gained entry to Tenochtitlan. One must admit the man was both bold and cunning, perhaps helped by having firearms against people only armed with spears. Sadly, this does mark the true downfall of the Aztec Empire, which I will recount in the upcoming missions. But for now, just remember that this is not the end of the Aztec Empire, because pride comes before the fall.